Okay, I think we're ready to go here. Good morning, guys. How many people who are at home, who are usually at school, are kind of ready to be back at school? Anybody? Just curious. Yeah, a few hands there. All right. Me too. Kind of looking forward to next week, although that's going to be weird because it's just going to be kind of this random exam time and even less structured than usual. But anyway, good to see other human beings besides your family. Not that we don't love our families, right? I love my family. But there's limits. All right. See what's going on here. Little delay in getting vocab test 7 posted. I realized I have those at school. They're paper copies. I thought I grabbed them before I left, and apparently that's the one thing I forgot. So I'm going to pop up there today and get those scanned. Certainly by the end of the school day. You still have till tomorrow to do it. So I don't think that's going to hold you back much or anything, but look for an alert for that to be posted and just make sure you still get that done. I will remind you tomorrow. Okay, we'll touch base on those videos that we finished up notes for last night. If you end up doing those late, a few of you were missing those, please let me know when you turn them in. Literature-wise, you should be completing reading of Destructors by tonight. Really weird story. It's definitely gonna, I would say even more so than some of you felt about Sonny's Blues. You're gonna finish it and you're gonna think, what the heck, you know, you're gonna understand what happened, but the why and the meaning are definitely kind of elusive. So it's gonna take some thought. Make sure to attend tomorrow to review that. And I think I can probably give you off on Friday. We'll probably do a practice and I can probably just assign that, and that can kind of be the thing that you're doing along with your vocab corrections. Writing wise, I am going to talk some with our long session today about the FRQs and talk about what I saw and didn't see. Got some notes on that there, and then got that note I had up yesterday about the exam, and you know, not a huge stressful thing, but something I want you to think about for next week. I think that'll be a useful reflective writing exercise. Okay, so if you can maybe pop over to your notes that you had on the videos, just kind of want to touch base on those. And as you know, some of you have probably started, some of you probably finished, some of you are probably in between. I don't want to kind of get deep into giving any spoilers about the Destructors, but I think the concepts that she brings up in these videos are going to apply very specifically to the story. And I did post a PDF. Somebody pointed out that I put up a PDF for readers logs last time. I thought that the unit guide is visible from your unit page where you have the videos. Is that the case? Whether it is or not, I cut out a PDF of the ones that you should be looking at on setting and plot and structure and put those up on the assignment. So you've got that there now in case you were not seeing that, or in case it's not there. So we want to think about setting, and we want to think about plot and structure as we read the Destructors. We want to do one reader's log on each. Okay, so like she says, you're thinking about setting and how it relies on details, how it depicts time and place. That's the definition you've learned since 9th grade, of course, but it also conveys values. And then that second one about how those values can kind of cross over, where you can make some inferences about characters, right? And thing, you know, that kind of traces back to the whole character thing, but character in relation to what the setting does to characters, what kind of characters it forms. And part of that can be done through like direct evidence of the story, and part of it can be done through inferences that you make because of the time and place where those characters are. Okay, so no setting is ever if it's a good story, then setting is not random, it's not arbitrary, right? It and its time and place and the details are there for reasons, and those are always going to overlap with the characters and other things too, right? Overlap with all these things overlap, obviously. And you're going to end up talking, even if you start by talking about setting or start about talking about plot and structure, you're going to end up talking about character too, because that's what stories are really about more than anything, is characters, right? Almost more so than what happens. It's, you know, who's doing things and why. And then as far as the plot and structure, we got these archetypes, right? She gives a pretty good list of different types of archetypes organized under the headings of characters, settings, and situations. Now, what if you recall from earlier in the year, what are these concepts of different story archetypes? Where did you learn a whole lot of rich information about those from? Do you remember when we were doing some kind of general information at the beginning of the year? What source did we have? Did we learn a lot about different archetypes, type of stories? Feel free to unmute and tell us. We read a whole book about it practically. You just don't remember what it's called. Can anybody say it? Nope, don't remember. It was that one called How to Read Literature Like a Professor, right? So when she brings up things like quests and journeys and how a dinner, right, itself can be a plot and a structure, even though it's also a setting, right? In those situations, form these different archetypes, and they point to all kinds of things, right? How um, journeys and quests can really, although you might see somebody depicting someone trying to go somewhere or do something, that what it's really about is that person like finding something about him or herself, or revealing something about him or her to the reader, right? It's not just about the journey. And a dinner is never just about the dinner. If it's given significant time in a plot and structure, it's there for a reason. Maybe it's more of a communion, right? Which causes people that don't have things in common to kind of overlap and find commonalities and things like that. Okay, so like the setting, plots and structures, whether they're archetype or maybe not so much of an archetype, are always there for a reason. Those sets of flashbacks that we have in Sonny's Blues, right? They are there for a reason. They give us backgrounds of these characters, and then we kind of learn more about why they are the way they are, because of memories that wouldn't otherwise fit into the chronology of a traditional linear time structure. Okay, so think about those things. You only have to do one for each, but that just kind of practices dipping into those things, and it'll be good practice for when we do our FRQs at the end of this unit. Okay, so speaking of FRQs, if we can switch gears and take the trouble to go back and now I put the grades up, I think yesterday. So what I did was I put the percentage that I gave based on the curve that I gave. So there are 8 total points you could get, right? Because it was the 1-2-1 rubric, right? We're doing the 1 point or 0 for the thesis. We're doing 0, 1, or 2 for the evidence that you kind of bring up, to legitimate points and give some analysis and connect to interpretation. And then there's that elusive, maybe somewhat elusive still at this point, sophistication point that I tried to be generous with. And you get 1 point for that or you don't, based on whether you want to do one of those 4 or 5 things that are listed, depending on which document we're looking at. So that gives her a total of 8 points. Okay, so if you got all 8 points, nobody got all 8. I had several people get 7, but nobody quite came through and got that sophistication point on both, as well as giving us a solid thesis and 2 points on the evidence. Several people got 4 out of 4 on one of them, but maybe not on the other. Okay, so it's still an A if you got 7 out of 8. Okay, so it takes it down to like a 94. It's basically 6 points down on each one. You could not get the sophistication point or miss 2 on one and 0 on the other and still get an 88. Okay, but I don't think that I need to be giving out, something as high as a high B or let alone an A if we're not at least getting the thesis point and the 2 evidence points. At this point, given something that we've read, we spent a lot of time on, that you should kind of know inside out, you should be able to make a statement on these kind of generic prompts, and you should be able to make 2 points about it, just in the form of like an extended paragraph. That shouldn't be too much to ask. Okay, so if you're not able to do that, then you're kind of getting down into C territory, and even in the bottom of the scale. And some of us are still not doing well on these. If you're getting 0 or 1 or 2 or only 3 points out of 8, that is getting you down toward the bottom of the grading scale. But it's not like I'm for 2 out of 8, which is essentially 25% of the points. I'm not giving you a 25. I'm still giving you like a 60 something. Okay, so I'm still giving a lot of leeway there. But it does need to be challenging because I do need to push you guys. And remember, we're not doing the full process yet. We're not getting full essays out yet, where you're going to ask for 4 points worth of evidence, and we'll talk about how thorough that needs to be and how you need to kind of structure your essays and give more thorough evidence. Some of you are well on your way. I'm getting people writing like 3-paragraph essays that are looking pretty good. Doesn't need to be about plot summary, but I'm seeing some pretty good ones already, kind of leaning toward that. All right, so let's talk. Let me kind of screen share and go into AP Classroom and kind of look at these 2 prompts that we had. And I would love it. I've got a kind of slow signal here. I would love it if some of us could maybe speak up, either sharing something that you wrote or something that you wish you wrote or something you think of right now based on these 2 prompts. Very much appreciate that. All right, so the first one, as you can see here, was works of literature often depict acts of betrayal. Now, I don't think I could give you an easier prompt to write about Hamlet. right? As far as this goes, I mean, the obvious choice is you're going to write about Claudius, right? In his huge act of betrayal and killing his own brother and taking his wife, right? Friends and even family may betray a protagonist. Main characters may likewise be guilty of treachery or betray their own values, which can make for some, may not apply to Claudius as much, right? But maybe some other characters, either from your own reading or from the list below. Choose a work of fiction. Okay, obviously, you're writing about Hamlet in a well-written essay. Analyze how that betrayal contributes to an interpretation of the work as a whole. You have to get into some interpreting, not just of what happens and why. I mean, interpreting why things happen, that's sort of interpretation, but what you really want to get at, and what's going to head you toward that sophistication point, is talking about what all this means, right? Broaden it out to, alternative interpretations or broader context or something like that. Let's go and look at the second question. In some works of literature, a character who appears briefly, okay? So you're talking about a minor character, or does not appear, even more than a minor character, right? Like Polonius, right, is a somewhat minor character, but he doesn't appear only briefly. They're looking for something kind of obscure here, right? Either from your own reading or from the list below. Choose a work of fiction. Okay, blah, 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 we know that. But tricky part here, choose a work of fiction in which such a character, now look at the reading. Here's an example of a prompt that you need to read carefully, okay? In which one of these minor characters affects action, theme, or the development of other characters. That does not mean that if you're writing this full essay, you write one paragraph about how a minor character affects action, another about theme, and about development of characters. It says or, okay? They analyze the effect of this character. So you would choose effects, for instance, the development of other characters as the one thing of this, or this. And then if you're writing a full essay, you might write about how that minor character affects this character, and this character. That would be a proper way to do that. For this one, okay, you might have pointed out a minor character and pointed out how it affects this character or one other. That would be one way to give two evidence. Or you could say how it affects one other character, but in two different ways. You can do that too. But it should not be this kind of overly broad, spreading yourself too thin, covering every single thing that the prompt says, when it really says just one thing.
Let's put it.
Is somebody accidentally unmuted or somebody trying to ask me a question there? Okay, I think it's an accident. All right, so analyze the effect of this character and how it contributes, once again, to an interpretation of the work as a whole. Now, again, while an interpretation of the work can be, all right, this is why this happens to some degree, you really want to get closer to something kind of thematic. And again, if you get closer to something thematic, then you're probably already on your way to getting a sophistication point because you are broadening or talking about alternative interpretations, okay? All right, I'm going to get out of that. Well, actually, let's bring that rubric up real fast too, because we want to talk about that too. Okay, so I had a feeling that many people did not take a close look and purposefully try to do something that is going to get you that sophistication point. You just thought, well, if I write a good essay, or maybe if I write a lot, I'm going to get that sophistication point. That's not necessarily the case, often not. Okay, so the thesis on this rubric, and by the way, when you guys see your results, okay, since this wasn't an actual FRQ, since I didn't like the questions on that, I selected my own questions and it has the full rubric on here. So if you guys are able to see your results, you're going to see a score out of 12. But what you should really do is if it says 6 out of 12, what that really means is 6 out of 8. Okay. And what you'll see on Progress Book in the side note next to your percentage grade, it'll say 6 out of 8. Okay. So that's going to sound, those grades are not going to look as good as, they're going to look poorer than they actually were, put it that way, if that makes sense. But with the thesis, you either did it or you didn't. It always says the thesis can be anywhere within the response, but it's got to be a real clear statement somewhere, really directly answering that prompt, okay? And not just repeating the prompt, but making a selection and hopefully at least leaning towards some interpretation. So I know you're going to do that. But really, you absolutely, I'll give you credit if it's in there a little bit later. Some of you guys are using some hooks and opening devices to kind of lead up toward that, and that's totally fine. But these essays where you kind of write yourself into a thesis like halfway through or toward the end are, a little sketchy there, and I'm trying to be generous and give it to you if I still see it. But for the sake of the test, you want that thing front loaded, at the very least after just a few sentences that are mostly just kind of opening. And again, you don't want to waste too much time on that. It can be good, Not necessary to have like a huge thing there. Okay, that's the first part of the rubric. Second part of the rubric. Now here, again, for this, it's got 4 points. We only need 2, and I already talked about what that is. Okay, two kind of points of evidence where you analyze and head toward interpretation. But here's what we really need to look at. Okay, so this point should be awarded for the sophistication of thought or complex understanding as part of the student's argument, not merely a phrase or reference. Okay, key part there, not merely a phrase or reference. Now, it's a fine line, and I said I was going to try to be generous. And if you kind of mention it toward the beginning a little bit, and you kind of say something toward the end again, and it's more than just kind of a brief sweeping generalization, you're really kind of connecting to one of these things, then I probably gave you the point. But if you're really not going beyond the text, you're not writing in such a way where there's these beautiful transitions, awesome complex sentences, and then some of the brief ones, and like really good descriptive diction of characters or whatever you're talking about, then you're not going to get it. Okay, so you have to do one of these 4 things. You have to zoom in a little bit here. Identify and explore complexities or tensions within the selected work. Okay, so I'm going to talk through some examples of these. Okay, with the first one, a betrayal. A complexity of a betrayal could be that although it's a betrayal, it's somewhat understandable, right? Like, say, for instance, Hamlet's betrayal of Ophelia that some of you wrote about. That's good, right? Because it's not a clear betrayal that's awful. You understand why he's doing it because he has a higher purpose, right? And that's a complexity, right? And that's a tension. You can write about that. In the second one, involving a minor character, complexities or tensions, Fortinbras, it's complex because it's almost like Fortinbras is never there in person, right, until the very end. But there's this tension the whole time because his persona and what he does, even though we only hear about it, creates so much suspense because it's creating this foil of Hamlet all through, and it's increasing his sense of I'm useless, right? I'm impotent. I can't do anything, right? And that's a complex thing with a lot of tension and a lot of suspense. Okay, so those are some examples of how you maybe could have incorporated that into your discussion with some examples there. 2, illuminating the student's interpretation by situating it within a broader context. Now, to me, this is the most obvious one that you can do, and it's something that you should probably do anyway, because situating within a broader context, what that really means is expressing a true theme, right? Because when you express a true theme, even though we haven't actually done like a direct lesson on theme, we're ending up talking about it a lot. You have to go beyond the text and think to yourself, well, let's think about it. Broad context. First question, betrayal. How about something like a political power grab by someone can have destabilizing effects on a society or a government, right? You could take that right into modern day and think about all the politics that are going on right now. Not that we're getting into specifics or anything, but there's all kinds of instances through history and in modern day when at least some people think that someone has done something to get power in a dishonest or treacherous way. It doesn't have to be a murder, right? You're expanding beyond the text, you're putting it in a broader context. In the second essay, broad context, sometimes a person in general, okay, that one, use that third person one, try not to say you, a person that one can barely encounter in life, right, that you only meet briefly, maybe once or twice, can have a huge effect on you, right, on oneself, because one recognizes that person is kind of a foil. We think about foils, right? You ever meet somebody and you think to yourself, gosh, that person does this so much better than me. And you think to yourself, well, why is that? And that forces you to kind of analyze your own character. That's a broader context beyond the text. All right, 3, accounting for alternative interpretations in the text. That's a little, these 2 and 3 can kind of overlap, but an alternative interpretation would be the text could possibly mean 2 different things, because we're basically talking about ambiguity there, right? So examples on the first one, Polonius, kind of an ambiguous character, right? And if we're analyzing his role in the story as far as a betrayal, because he takes part in Claudius's betrayal, right? The alternative interpretations there could be, and we don't know for sure, we never find out for sure. Number one, did he know the betrayal that he was taking part in, or was he just, bootlicking Claudius, right? That's that's a complexity like in number one, right? But it's also an alternative interpretation because it could be either one, right? And that doesn't necessarily change the overall theme, but it leaves some ambiguity in there, and that adds to the complexity. Alternative interpretations of Fortinbras. One thinks, if you're analyzing Fortinbras as a minor character, only appears briefly, but is he an antagonist, right? He seems to be the one, not the one. I mean, Claudius or Hamlet is of course fighting against Claudius, but you also think is kind of Denmark as being like, what you want to be the winning team, and here Fortinbras seems to be kind of an antagonist there, right? But then on the other hand, is he really not at all? He's just kind of functioning as a foil to Hamlet. Alternative interpretations, right? All right, number 4, I'm talking a lot today, sorry, is employing a style that is consistently vivid and persuasive. Now, other than, paying attention to lessons about grammar and how we want to use transitions and use increasingly complex sentences for part of our sentences, not all of them, and using a diction that is really descriptive to, say, discuss a setting or analyze a character. I can't teach you that as directly. Some of you are going to do that naturally. Some of you can work toward that. The more examples you see and the more things that you read, and I think it's natural readers who read on their own who are going to be able to score this point easily. I did see a couple people who wrote in such a way where I was like, hey, you're wowing me with your writing itself, as well as the analysis, which is valid. I'm going to give you that point. Okay, so you don't have to do all these things. You only have to do one of them. If you do more than one, then great. Then that's going to, probably help you get, up to 4 on the evidence and things like that. All right, coming off sharing here. Like I said, a lot of talking. How about in the first one? Let's just hear some examples before we go of what you did. Now, obviously, Claudius's betrayal is the most obvious one, right? What are some other things that you guys can think of now that you did that you wish you would have done? What are other betrayals? You tell me. More participation here. Who else has a betrayal that you could do some good analysis with on this that you either did or didn't?
When Hamlet basically leaves Ophelia just to get revenge on his uncle and doesn't tell her or be honest with her about his plans or anything, and she ends up going crazy over it.
Absolutely. Now, Ophelia kind of dumps Hamlet, but Hamlet also kind of dumps Ophelia. It's kind of a weird back and forth thing there. And the way that Hamlet does that without explaining to her the real reason is a betrayal of honesty, right? For sure. She does the same to him, but he does the same to her, right? And that right there kind of shows you how, if you're getting at the interpretation of the work, that both of those things, Ophelia doing it to him and him doing it to her, are both resultant of the main betrayal, and that shows that kind of domino effect, which could turn into an interpretation about how a treacherous power grab like that can just affect the whole society, if not bring it down. What else? What are some other betrayals, even if they seem minor? Some of the best ways to answer these questions sometimes is to think of one that seems kind of minor, and you show its huge significance in the story by making it, defensible. That's almost better than making the obvious choice. You can write a solid essay, about Claudius, but it is kind of obvious, right? Any others? I mentioned Polonius before, right? There's at least a couple other major betrayals that go on.
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern betray Hamlet.
Absolutely. Who was that talking?
Christopher.
Chris. Thanks, Chris. Absolutely, because that's kind of the nail in the coffin with him feeling like everybody, with the exception of Horatio, is working against him, right? And that's a way that you could put that in context with significance, that and put it in a broader context, right? Like people in general, when you feel like there's a lot of dishonesty around you and you feel like your best friends you can't even trust, then that can really drive you over the edge, right? And that's exactly what happens to Hamlet there. Hopefully you can't relate to that too closely, but it certainly happens, right? Anything else? About Laertes? It's late in the story and they aren't really tight or anything, but you can kind of tell that Laertes was not a bad person. He gets caught up in Claudius's treachery, and then even toward the end, Laertes has a big betrayal, probably you could say of his own values, to be dishonest toward Hamlet in taking part in this fencing match, which is rigged with a sharpened, an unbaited sword and poison in the chalice, right? And he redeems himself. That'd be great. I'm not sure. I think 1 or 2 people may have written about that, but not too many. Okay, how about on the second one? Minor character. Obviously, you're not going to write about Claudius. You're not going to write about Hamlet here, right? I don't think you're even going to write about Gertrude, right? You're probably not going to write about Ophelia, right? These are not characters that appear only briefly. So who can we write about, or who did we write about? I mentioned Fortinbras. He's definitely a good one. What's at least one more? Patient wait time. Can't think of any others. Yeah, good job, Maui. The grave workers, especially the main one, right? Because the other one is almost kind of a comic foil, right? He just sends him, fetch me a stupid liquor. But the first one, yes, absolutely a minor character, right? Because what does he do? Maui, did you write about that one? I can't remember. I know a couple. Okay, that's still a good example. A couple people did, and what that gravedigger or clown, whatever you call him, does is helps Hamlet come to the full realization of accepting his own mortality, and then he might have to sacrifice it to finish, this task that his father has given him from beyond the grave. And the beautiful situational irony of that. But all these intelligent royal people around him, he hasn't quite figured out. But there's this gravedigger at the end who really kind of gets him over the hump. All right. Those are probably the main best choices. You could also do the actor, right? Because he kind of wakes Hamlet up to his, he kind of kicks him along that path of kind of realizing that why can't he feel more and do more? He needs to get over his initial shock and mourning, right? When he gives that speech and things like that. But yeah, the character appears only briefly. He's a little bit different from a minor character. It's even less. All right. I think that's enough for today. You guys have a long day of live stuff. Make sure and do a good job on that destructor stuff. And I will have the vocab test up a little bit later today. Questions before you go? Okay. Thanks for coming, guys. Enjoy your day and see you tomorrow.